I was mending her chest armor. She leaned closer and said, "Go on, human." The hull groaned above me like something alive and dying at the same time, and I did not stop working. Sparks fell from a torn cable somewhere near the ceiling, and the whole maintenance bay smelled of burnt metal and coolant. 3 minutes ago, we had taken a direct hit along the starboard flank. 2 minutes ago, the captain had ordered every fixer on the ship to report to the nearest damage point and start patching whatever needed patching, armor included, because in 20 minutes we were expected to be back in the fight. I had less than 20 minutes to seal a crack running straight across the chest plate of the one person on this ship who scared every other human into silence. Her name was Vale, and she was the commanding officer of the Kesh contingent stationed with us. Tall, sharp-featured, with pale gray skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. She sat on the bench in front of me with her arms crossed, watching my hands the way a hunter watches something it has not decided whether to trust yet. "Faster," she said. Her voice was calm, but underneath the calm was steel. "The captain wants us back on the line before the second wave arrives." "I go as fast as the metal lets me," I said, pressing the sealant gun against the crack running across her chest plate. "You want it fast, or you want it to hold? Pick one." She did not answer that. She never answered questions like that. She just watched. I had been assigned to her unit 6 months ago, back when the alliance between our two species was still fragile enough that nobody trusted anybody, and every human on this ship still flinched a little when a Kesh soldier walked past. Vale had never flinched at me, not once, not even the day I accidentally spilled reactor coolant on her boots. She had simply looked down, looked at me, and said nothing, which I later learned was the highest compliment a Kesh soldier could give someone who had just made a mistake in front of them. The alarm overhead cut off mid-cycle, replaced by the low pulse of the ship shifting from open combat status to standby, which meant we had 30 more minutes than expected, not 20. Small mercy. I kept working anyway. Cracked armor did not wait for good news. "You are quiet tonight," Vale said. "I'm always quiet when I'm trying not to weld your ribs shut." The plates along her jaw shifted, a small flicker that on a Kesh face passed for amusement. I had learned to watch for that flicker the way sailors watch the horizon for weather. "You joke when you are afraid," she said. "I have noticed this. Your captain shouts when he is afraid. Your pilot goes silent. You joke. Would you rather I go silent?" "No." She said it fast, faster than she usually said anything. Then, like she had surprised herself, she looked away toward the far wall of the bay, where 2 engineers were arguing over a coolant valve that refused to seal. I finished the first pass of sealant and reached for the reinforcing strip, the thin lattice of woven fiber that would keep the crack from spreading the next time something hit her. My hands were steady because they had to be. Somewhere above us, the ship was still counting down toward the next wave of enemy fighters, and somewhere in that count was the very real chance that this crack, if it failed, would be the last thing standing between Vale and a piece of shrapnel with her name on it. "You did not have to come down here yourself," I said, threading the strip along the fracture line. "Could have sent a junior officer for a repair like this." "I do not trust junior officers with this." "With armor repair?" "With me." That landed somewhere I was not prepared for it to land, and I kept my eyes on the crack because looking up felt dangerous, in a way that had nothing to do with the war outside. Vale had a way of saying things plainly that human officers never did. No dressing it up, no softening it, just the fact laid out on the table, like a ration pack. It should have been easier to deal with than the careful, coded way humans usually talk to each other. Instead, it made my chest feel tight in a completely different way than fear did. "You do not trust me either," I said. "Not really. Not the way you trust your own people." "I trust you with this," she said, and tapped 2 fingers against the crack in her own armor, right over the sealant I had just laid down. "I have watched you work on 6 of my soldiers this rotation. You do not rush. You do not guess. When Torin's shoulder plate failed during the last engagement, you were the one who stayed behind the line to finish the weld instead of falling back with the others. He would have died if I fell back." "Yes," Vale said, "that is exactly my point." I did not have an answer for that, so I kept working, smoothing the reinforcing strip flat against the ceramic, checking the edges for any gap that might let pressure sneak through during the next hit. The bay around us had quieted, the two arguing engineers finally walking off toward the valve room, leaving just the two of us and the low hum of the ship's systems cycling back toward combat readiness. "Can I ask you something?" I said, "and you don't have to answer if it's against some Kesh code of honor or whatever." The jaw plates flickered again. "Ask. Why did your people agree to fight alongside us at all? 6 months ago, none of your command staff wanted humans anywhere near this war. I heard 2 of your officers wanted to leave before we even signed the accord." Vale was quiet for a moment, long enough that I thought she might not answer. Then she leaned forward, elbows on her knees, close enough that I could see the faint scar running under her collarbone, the kind of old wound that had healed wrong and never been fixed properly. "Go on, human," she said, and there was something different in her voice now, something lower and more careful, like she was choosing each word the way I chose each pass of the sealant gun. "Keep asking. I will tell you the truth, and you will not like all of it." "I can handle truth. My people do not forgive easily," she said. "We remember every wrong done to us, every failed alliance, every broken promise, for generations. It is how we survive. It is why we are still here, after 3 empires tried to erase us. But it also means we do not trust quickly, and we do not trust strangers, and humans were the strangest thing this galaxy had thrown at us in 1,000 years. So what changed?" "You did," she said. "Not you specifically, your species. My command staff sent scouts to observe human colonies before the accord was signed. They expected to find weakness. Instead, they found something they had no name for. Which was colonies that kept rebuilding after disasters that should have ended them. Ships that turned back into danger to retrieve wounded crew instead of leaving them. A species that fights harder than almost anyone in this galaxy, and yet cannot seem to stop caring for each other in the middle of the fighting. My command staff could not model it. A warrior who protects only their own interests is predictable. A warrior who runs toward danger for someone else's sake, for no gain. That is not predictable at all." "That sounds like a weakness to me," I said, tightening the last edge of the reinforcing strip. "Predictable enemies are easier to plan around." "It is not a weakness," Vale said. "It is the opposite. My people spent 1,000 years learning to survive by calculating everything, every risk, every gain, every loss. And then we watched humans win battles they had no logical reason to win, simply because enough of you refused to leave each other behind. That is not weakness. That is the most dangerous thing I have ever seen a species do." I sat back on my heels, sealant gun still warm in my hand, and looked at her properly for the first time since I had started the repair. Vale was watching me, the way she had been watching me since I sat down, but the storm cloud eyes had softened into something else, something I did not have a word for yet. "You're saying your people are afraid of us," I said. "Not because we're strong, because we're kind." "I am saying," Vale said, leaning closer, close enough now that I could feel the warmth coming off her skin, close enough that the low hum of the ship seemed to fade into the background, "that kindness without limits is the most unpredictable weapon in this war, and I do not know what to do with a species that wields it so easily." The bay was very quiet then. Somewhere above us, the ship shifted again, another status change cycling through the walls, but neither of us moved. I could see every detail of her face this close, the fine lines along her cheekbones that marked her as older than I had guessed, the faint gray shimmer under her eyes that Kesh soldiers got after too many sleepless cycles, the steady, patient way she held herself even now, even sitting still, like stillness itself was a kind of readiness. "Go on," she said again, quieter this time. "Tell me why you do it. Why you stayed behind the line for Torin. Why you spilled coolant on my boots and looked more embarrassed about that than about the enemy fire coming in behind you. Why a species that fights as hard as yours still cannot seem to walk away from anyone." I thought about lying, or joking, the way I usually did when a conversation got too close to something real. But Vale did not deal in jokes, not really, and something about the way she was looking at me made the truth feel like the only honest thing I had to offer. "Because leaving people behind is easy," I said. "Anyone can do that. It doesn't take courage. It doesn't take strength. It just takes deciding that someone else's life is worth less than your own comfort. And once you start doing that, once you let yourself believe that's fine, you never really stop." It gets easier every single time, so we don't let ourselves start. We make it a rule, not a feeling. Because feelings fail when things get bad enough. Rules hold. A rule, Vale repeated, testing the word. Never leave anyone behind, even strangers. Even people from a species you had never met a year ago. Even people who scared the entire crew into silence the first week they were on board, I said, and the jaw plates flickered again, sharper this time, closer to something like a real smile. I did not mean to scare anyone. You didn't have to mean it. You just walked through the mess hall like you owned it, and half the crew forgot how to chew. And you, she said, did you forget how to chew? No, I said. I just spilled coolant on your boots instead. Different kind of embarrassing. The flicker along her jaw held longer this time, settling into something warm and open that I had never seen on her face before, not once in 6 months of working alongside her unit. She reached out and picked up the chest plate from the bench beside me, turning it over in her hands, running one finger along the seam where the crack had been, now smooth and solid under the reinforcing strip. This will hold, she said. It'll hold through the next wave. After that, I want to run a full inspection, make sure the resin cured evenly. You worry too much. You're wearing this into a fight in the next half hour. I get to worry as much as I want. She looked up at me then, and something passed between us that had nothing to do with cracked ceramic or sealant guns, or the countdown ticking somewhere in the walls of the ship. It was the kind of look that made the bay feel smaller than it was, made the hum of the engines fade further into the background, made the 6 months of careful distance between us feel suddenly very thin. When this war ends, Vale said slowly, like she was testing whether the words were allowed to exist outside her own head. If it ends, and if we are both still standing when it does, I would like to understand more of this rule your people live by. Not as an officer studying an ally, as myself. That's a big if, I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. I have survived worse odds, she said. So have you. That is, I believe, the entire point. Before I could answer, the alarm cut through the bay again, sharper this time, the full combat cycle spinning up through the walls, red light sweeping across the floor as the ship's systems screamed the warning that the second wave had arrived early. Vale was on her feet before the second pulse finished, chest plate already sliding into place over her shoulders, the crack sealed and solid beneath her hands. Report to your station, she said. And just like that, the officer was back, the warmth folded away behind duty, the way it always was in the middle of a war. But she paused at the hatch, one hand braced against the frame, and looked back at me the way she had looked at me before the alarm sounded, like the conversation was not finished, only interrupted. Later, human, she said, you will help me understand the rest. I am not leaving that unanswered, and neither are you. Then she was gone, boots striking hard against the deck plating as she ran toward the bridge, and I stood there for one more second longer than I should have, sealant gun still warm in my hand, before the second alarm forced my feet into motion. The fight that followed lasted 11 minutes, though it felt longer, the way every fight does when you are counting seconds instead of living them. I spent it in the lower bay, running repairs on anything that limped back through the airlock, patching hull breaches and burnt wiring, while the ship shook around me with each impact absorbed by the shields. Somewhere above, Vale and her unit held the line against fighters that outnumbered us nearly 2-1, and I did not let myself think about the crack in her chest plate, sealed less than an hour before, holding or not holding against whatever the enemy threw at her. When the all-clear finally sounded, the bay went quiet in that particular way it always did after combat, the silence heavier than any noise, full of people counting who had come back and who had not. I counted faces as they filed past me toward the medical bay, checking for the pale gray skin and storm cloud eyes I was looking for, and my chest stayed tight until I finally saw her walk through the airlock under her own power, chest plate scorched black across one side but whole, unbroken, holding exactly where I had left it. She saw me before I could look away, and something in her face shifted, relief maybe, though Kesh soldiers rarely let relief show that plainly. It held, she said, tapping the blackened ceramic over the spot where the crack had been. Told you it would. You did not tell me. You said it would hold through the next wave. You did not sound certain. I'm never certain, I said, I'm just good at my job." The jaw plates flickered again, and this time, she let the smile stay. No flicker fading back into stillness. Just an open, honest expression that made the whole exhausted, scorched bay feel a little less heavy. "There will be more waves," she said. "More cracks. More nights like this one." "Probably," I said. "War's not exactly known for slowing down to let people finish their conversations." "Then we will finish them between the waves," Vale said, "one crack at a time, until there are no more waves left to interrupt us." She turned to walk toward the medical bay for her post-combat check, but stopped after 2 steps, looking back at me over her shoulder with something steady and certain in her eyes, the kind of certainty I had only ever seen her use for battle plans and tactical assessments, never for anything as simple and unguarded as this. "Thank you," she said, "for the rule you live by. I do not fully understand it yet, but I intend to." Then she was gone again, disappearing down the corridor toward medical, leaving me standing in the scorched, quiet bay with a sealant gun still in my hand, and a feeling in my chest that had nothing to do with fear of the fighting, and everything to do with the promise of every conversation still waiting to be finished. One repaired crack, one shared silence, one honest answer at a time, for as long as this war and everything after it would let us have.